Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we've got a quilting play-by-play of our latest Stashin with Stephanie design, Interlocking Triangles. This one was a really fun design to come up with. I was inspired by a Frank Lloyd Wright shapes book for my toddler where I saw a bunch of these interlocking triangles and I was like, that needs to be a quilt. And then we had this amazing fabric, Impressions from Windham Fabrics, and it just is one where you want to have it big. You want the fabric to be the star of the show. And so this allowed that to happen. It's so fun. It's adorable. And so we're going to watch actual GoPro footage of me quilting this, and you can get inside my head as I make my design choices for this month. But before we get into that, I just want to make sure that you guys know about Stashin with Stephanie. It's a subscription club that we run here at Quilt Addicts Anonymous. We've got about 800 members. Each of them get 10 fat quarters in the month, or in the mail each month. And so that's not enough to make a quilt. That would make a small baby quilt and then have a little bit left over, but not usually a full-size quilt. This is actually a small lap, and it takes 16 fat quarters and about a yard of background fabric. And so what you can do is, if you're a member, you get that bundle and then you get the pattern that I designed for free that's been inspired by it. And you can take that pattern and you can take that bundle and you can do whatever you want to do with it. But if you decide I really like this quilt, you want to make this, then we have what's called finishing kits for our customers, where they get the fabrics they didn't get in their bundle plus whatever they need to make a complete quilt top. So the bundle plus the finishing kit equals a regular full-size quilt kit. So in this case, they got 6 fat quarters and a yard of backing fabric, and then we had scrappy binding, my favorite kind of binding. And so that came from the fat quarter. So then they get all that at a discount. So it's a fabulous club to be part of, especially with inflation hitting the fabric world as well. You're going to be able to kind of maintain your quilting budget because you'll be able to get it at 20% off. If you are a member, you can get your fat quarter bundle, then your additional fabric. If you want, that applies to, like, if you want to get yardage for some backing fabric, whatever you want to do, you can grab it from that line of fabric. Plus you get access to over $200 worth of free patterns that we've released as part of the club. And you get a special discount on my 2 fat quarter books, Fat Quarter Patchwork Quilts, which is a bestseller, and Fat Quarter Workshop. So they are really fun. It's an awesome club to be a part of, and you get lots of goodies. Now, if you join because you see this and you love this, we already shipped this out to our members. You will not get this quilt kit. Your first bundle is gonna, if you join by the end of the month, is gonna be Claire Jane, and it'll ship around the 20th of August. So if you really like this fabric, go grab a quilt kit. If you get it as your second purchase after you have joined the club, you will get that 20% off discount. This is going fast, folks. So don't wait on that if you really like this fabric. All right, let's get into the quilting play-by-play. Before we get into that, I wanted to show you all of the threads that I used on this quilt. So I feel like every month I'm like, I only had a certain amount of time to quilt, so I had to do something quick. But I still wanted to do something that would do justice to the pattern. And this month was no different. It's not that I procrastinated. It's that I put way too much on my plate this month. We did our Quiltmas in July celebration, which was 12 different tutorials, 4 new and 8 recycled from previous projects, but all but one of those had new kits to go with it. And while I didn't make every single one of those, I was very involved in coordinating everything for it and picking the fabrics that would go in it and making sure that, like, for our fulfillment, that our sheets that our people go by to make sure that everything is in it in the right quantity and folded neatly for you. Like, it was a ton of work. And I wrote an entire quilt pattern for our mug rugs, which I believe might be sold out now, but there may be some kits available still for the quilt kit version of it, for the ornaments collection one. And then I did a tutorial for SIY that's going to be coming to you guys soon on some cute little nesting baskets. And my daughter was baptized, so I made an entire gown for her in like 4 or 5 days. And then we had, of course, this quilt that needs to go from start to finish and have an entire pattern running for it. So it was a crazy, crazy time. I think I started quilting this. I got it on the Longarm, started quilting at 10 o'clock and was done by about 1:30. in the evening. And yes, I was up early and working the next day, but now I get to take a break once I'm done filming this video and relax. So next month, I don't know it's going to be any better, but maybe in September, I can not quilt until 1 in the morning. We'll see how this goes. But regardless, back to this, now that you know how crazy my life is and how much I sew on a daily basis. But anyway, so what I wanted to do was some simple quilting. We'll just have some simple wavy lines. We have an entire section on wavy lines in our Intro to Free Motion Quilting course, which you can take for free on our website. It's a really great course. It tells you 4 different quilting stitches that you can then customize and make every quilt look unique. And those are like the 4 that I go back to all the time. So it's just some basic wavy lines, but what I wanted to do to make it special and to help the fabric shine, because let's face it, the fabric is the star of the show here, is I change colors a lot of times. Like every single time I had a new color, I changed my threads because I wanted to make sure that we just saw texture and not thread. So like here I have gray, and here I have purple, and here I have a darker blue, and there's another lighter blue in some of these triangles. So that way when we look at it, we're gonna see like the texture of the waves accentuating our interlocking triangles, and we're not gonna have it taken away by using like one all over beige thread because that matches the background. So what I'm gonna do is I filmed like in real time when I was working on my background and when I was working on the triangles for the first colorway. And then I just did time lapse of everything else so you guys can see what goes into a quilt like this, where it's not hard, it's just a little bit more time consuming because you are changing threads and going back and forth, and you just keep rolling the quilt back and forth, back and forth. And if you are doing it on your home sewing machine, it's not that big of a deal because you're just gonna do one block at a time, like you would do anyway. But if you're doing it on the long arm, it's just constant rolling back and forth until you've got them all. And then inevitably you find out as you're doing your final pass and making sure you have everything that you missed one. I think I missed this one here and I had to go back and throw the purple back on and do it. But we got them all. They all made it through and it all looks fantastic. And I love the way that this quilt turned out. Now this can be a little expensive if you do not already have a large thread stash. But what I have found after years and years of quilting on the long arm is that I am primarily using my linen, my white, and then like a really light gray for my quilting all over designs. I use that a lot. So I get those in the big spools, and then I just get the small spools of my colors because I just don't use them as much. Because a lot of times I'm doing something, it might not be an all over design, but I don't want to take the time to change threads. So I'm going with whatever matches the background. So get in the big spools like these 3, like I'm probably never going to run out of the celery green. It's a great color to quilt with. I have used it as an all over design, but not very often. And I'm going to have this until I die, I think, because I just am never going to make it through this much of a celery green thread. But I cannot get more white in this size. I have ordered like 2 or 3 times in the last year or probably the last 6 months, and every time it's been out of stock. So like that kind of stuff, like I need all the time because I will use the big ones of those more basic colors, but little ones, save your money, go for the little spools. You'll probably be fine. Alrighty, so let's do the play-by-play and I'll talk you through what I'm doing. All right, so as I'm getting started here, I'm starting kind of like in the corner and I'm going off to like a third over. And then I want to travel along there. I use my Natalia Bonner's 4-in-1, the piece and quilt ruler, but any straight edge will do. And then I'm traveling to about the same point on the other side. And then I'm going to travel again to get to the point. And the reason why I'm traveling is I want those lines to kind of crisscross each other, much in the same way that like this fabric is kind of going all over the place. I like to take my cues on design a lot of times from the fabric because that helps me figure out what I'm going to do. So you can see I kind of hit the third there. So now I'm going out to the other corner and I'm going to come down to try to hit the third on the other bottom. Actually, this time I went straight into the corner. I was still kind of figuring out what I was doing. But now I'm gonna travel. And to do that, I'm stitching, I press my seams open, so I stitch right next to that seam. It becomes invisible when you are just looking at it from a distance. Obviously, when you get up close, you can see it. And if I would have had all the time in the world, I would have outlined every single outside triangle and every single background to help things stand out, but I did not have all the time in the world, so I just used this as kind of a travel stitch. But this way, I'm kind of able to crisscross my lines a little bit, and even though I had more of a patterned way to do it, so that way, like, I wasn't like making it up from scratch every single time I went through, I was at least able to kind of create, it looked random. It looked a little bit more random when you were actually going through and putting it together. And my goal was to make sure that I had some lines crossing as I went through and went across this. So here I crossed 2 lines, and this time I did go to like that middle center. So it worked out. It looks like I've got like 4 lines randomly waving across. But there is a pattern to it, and it works pretty well for me. All right, so you're gonna see me do this for a while as I work my way across the quilt. I did put the quilt on, this is the correct way, this is like top and bottom. And I did that specifically so that I wouldn't have to break thread as I was going across my background. Otherwise, I would have only been able to do like this one section, and then I would have had to break thread and go to the next one. I was a little worried. I quilt on a Lenny for APQS, and there have been like only 2 times in the history of having that long arm for like 4 or 5 years now that I wish my throat space was just like 1 inch wider. This was one of those quilts because I was just barely able to go from one point to the other. This is about almost 14 inches from point to point. And that was about the max of what my long arm could handle in the throat space. And that was kind of hard to make that happen, but it just barely worked, so I was able to make that work. The other option would have been to load it sideways, and then I would have only had 12 inches from here to here, and that would have been no problem to go back and forth and do my wavy lines. But then I would be trading off breaking my thread for every single one of these, and I figured I was going to have enough thread breaks because I knew I was going to be changing all my colors. I didn't want to have to do it too for that background. So you kind of have to pick and choose. But in terms of like throat space, like if you're thinking about getting a long arm, you want to keep in mind that if you are not going to be doing computerized quilting, you only have the length from your arm to your wrist that you can work with. Because when you're getting out to here, you do not have the same control as when you're in tight like this. And so you don't want to be like leaning way out if you get the big daddy giant one, because that back like foot, if you're a shorty like me, I'm 5'2", is going to be useless to you. You're never going to use that unless you're using the computerized functions of the long arm, and then it can fill that throat space, and it doesn't need your arms to be longer. But if you're keep in mind, you know, your wingspan, because your sweet spot is going to be right in here. When you're way out here, you're not going to have control of that, and your quilting isn't going to be as good. And I tell you that from experience because I have tried to do it on the bigger machines, and it's not as good when you're reaching beyond your ability to be able to do that. But for me, as a 5'2" little Italian girl, like the Lenny's perfect, absolutely perfect for me. In terms of what my reach is and being able to control that stitch all the way through. If you're taller, you got a little bit bigger wingspan, maybe you might want to go a step up. If you want to do computerized quilting, then it doesn't matter. Get whatever you can afford for that, and you can have a lot of fun with that and pick computerized designs. But if you're watching this video on how to do better long arm quilting, my guess is you're not doing computerized, so you have my permission to not get the $30,000 machine. You can totally go for like the 10 to 12, and it will be totally okay because you don't need all that throat space if you're not going to do computerized. So that's that. APQS probably isn't going to like that I said that, but this is a fabulous machine. I love it. And it's perfect for me. All right, so now we are going to get started on our triangle. So you can see I started in that outer corner and I kind of planned my path. I knew I wanted to crisscross in the center, so I kind of hit the center. I didn't mark it, I eyeballed it. And that's when I changed directions with a nice sharp point and went back down to the corner. And now I'm kind of thinking, okay, what I want to do next. And I'm going to go ahead and travel to the middle of that triangle. And now I'm going to cross myself over. And I'm going to go to the top of the triangle, right? It would be like at the top of this part, and make my way back down to the center. And now comes where the lines are going to cross. And so I'm coming into that inner center, and we're going to go all the way to the tip of the triangle at the top, where those interlocking triangles are very, very tip top. So this is where you start to see it sort of crisscross and create that woven texture that's very similar to like this crazy part there. So at this point I need to lock my stitches in place. So I'm stitching back and forth a little bit, and then I'm going to pull my bobbin thread up to the top, and I'm just going to snip that off. And you can absolutely bury those threads if you want. I just don't. So here I'm doing, this is the edge of a quilt. I have another yellow section, so I'm using the same thread. And I'm just trying to kind of recreate that look where I just kind of have two that are coming up into it. So that way from a texture standpoint, when you see the entire quilt, it looks the same. And so here we are, we're back to another one. This is the other half of it. So this is like the bottom half of the interlocking triangle, because obviously on the edges, they're gonna be split up a little bit. So again, I'm just trying to remember at this point, because this is like as I first started. I was trying to remember, okay, where do I go next? You can see I'm like trying to track it, and I don't think I did it right. I think I swapped where I was going next, but that's okay. It's not the end of the world if it's not perfect, because we're not machines. It's okay. But it looks like I have maybe figured out where I'm going next, and I am now going to attempt to mimic that same look and feel of the others. And it's, you know, it's interesting as you're like figuring out your path and you don't have it totally down and remembered yet, because that totally is a thing where you're like, okay, what did I just do? Especially if you've rolled back and you can't see it, that can be really kind of challenging a little bit as you work on that. And there definitely were times where like I thought like I was going to one end and then I went to the other, so I had this big weird swoop coming in, and you know, it didn't work. All right, so here I am tacking things off, and then I pulled a bobbin thread to the top and just cut it right off. So you can see like in between all of these, I'm rolling the quilt back. So I had gotten all the way from top to bottom doing the background, and then I started at the very bottom with that yellow, and then I'm working my way to the top. So right now we're doing this block right over here, which is my second to last one for the row, and then I'm gonna head back to the other. And after we get through this, you can see it doesn't take very long at all to do each individual one. What takes the time is to continually roll, to stop and start your threads, to change them when you get done with one colorway, and inevitably when you miss one and you have to go back and switch threads again until you get that one. It's just a thing. See, you can see I thought I was going one way, and then I swooped all the way off to the other side. It didn't work out for me. But that's what takes the time. It's just continually moving around and moving your quilts around, and sometimes you're lucky and you have two of them in one pass that you can use, and sometimes you're rolling after every single time you stop and start your threads. But I think it's totally worth it if you have the time, and if you have a quilt like this where you want the fabric to be what stands out. So here now we're in time-lapse mode, so you're gonna see me go a lot faster, and you're gonna see the actual rolls of the quilt. So you can see here I'm coming off to the side as I change my threads, and now we're gonna move on to the orange. And it just is a lot of back and forth, and it's a lot of fun, and I really love it. I used to do this a lot when I would be working with some of the fabric manufacturers to create block of the months that would show off their fabric collections, and then that would be their official block of the month for the year. And so, you know, they're coming out with a new basic or something, they want to really highlight it. And I want to make sure that the fabric is the star of the show and that my quilting just accentuates that. So that's why I have my massive thread stash, because I would always come up with something that would match that fabric perfectly. I would quilt my entire background first to anchor everything down. And then I would just keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, you know, hitting all my blues and all my purples and so on until I got everything the way I thought it needed to be. And then when you look at it from a distance, you see the texture. It looks gorgeous, and it's all quilted uniformly, but it looks totally like it's just part of the fabric because this purple matches so well and this gray matches so well. And even like with the blues, I have a darker blue for this block and another one and a lighter blue for some of the lighter blue areas. And like the oranges, we have a yellow and then we also have an orange. And even though there was only one orange block, I made sure to do that. So it's really, it's an extra step. It's definitely an extra investment if you don't already have a large thread stash for quilting fabric or for quilting thread, but I love it. I just love it. It's been a long time since I've done one like this, but it is so worth it when you do. So I'm just gonna let you guys watch this in time lapse as I quilt for a couple hours. And I'm totally, by the way, wearing a nightgown with my quilting sweatshirt over top of it because it was, you know, it was late, and I'm going to be totally honest. I sewed at home all day and wrote the pattern all day, and I don't think I changed my underwear, but I didn't get dressed. So I'm just going to admit that to you. We've all had those days where we're just like, I'm just going to sew, and I'm going to do my basic toilette, but nothing more. We're just going to have a comfy sew day. And that's kind of what happened for me. I wrote the pattern all morning and the early afternoon, and then I got my quilt top finished together, and then I came in and quilted this for you all so we could get it out on time for you. So someday my life will be better. It'll be fine, but it's all good. My kids also had the plague right now. It's not COVID, but it's like this 24-hour bug. So we've been like trading off who's watching the children, and it's just, and they've traded off who's sick. That's the worst, when like one is sick and then the other's fine and then the other is sick, and because it's just, your whole week is just like, okay, who's watching the children today? So it's all good, but you know, you got to cherish the little years, right? So anyway, I'll let you guys watch. We'll play some fun music, and you can see all my thread changes and all back and forth. It's just fun. Oh, and don't forget to join Stashin with Stephanie. It's a good time, and you save a lot of money on fabric and get free patterns. So, fun stuff.